Hi guys, thanks for coming. My name's Stewart. I am the head of content at Pink News. Today we are talking about queer journalism, and I've got a lovely bunch of panelists with me here today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves because they'll do a much better job than me. So if we start from the end and work our way back up, that would be great.
Cool. My name's Danielle, and I'm staff writer at Diva magazine.
I'm Carrie, and I'm editor of Diva magazine.
And because we all wanted to come, I'm Roxy from Diva magazine, deputy editor.
Just Diva.
Team Diva.
Hi, I'm Anais. I brought something to help me. So I'm a data designer for Le Parisien. It's a French mainstream media, and it's one of the biggest. It sells like 400,000 copies. And what I do mainly is data visualization. So I try to explain things with pictures, maps, whatever, and yeah, I do a lot of explaining stuff with image.
Cool. Thanks.
I'm Dana Piccoli. I unfortunately do not work for Diva.
Not yet.
But I'm a writer, entertainment critic, and editor.
Cool, thanks guys. So today I kind of just wanted to keep the conversation a little bit casual and maybe a little bit personal if everyone's up for that. But it's kind of just talking about queer women's experiences in both LGBT plus journalism and also, I guess, mainstream. People's personal experiences, how their identity may have either helped or hindered their career in media, and also the kind of responsibility that we have at either LGBT plus publications or as queer women in media to be kind of like inclusive and representative, and you basically like keeping a check on whether media is doing a good job or a bad job at that. So if everyone's with me, we'll kick off. So I just kind of wanted to ask everyone to begin with about their kind of like thoughts on journalism as an industry, right? So before I worked at Pink News, I was in kind of the mainstream. I worked at, I don't know if this is the right crowd, but I worked at the Evening Standard under George Osborne, and kind of like more mainstream stuff before I moved over into LGBT plus specific journalism. And from my point of view, I don't really see journalism as being particularly inclusive as an industry on the whole. So I was kind of wondering if anyone wanted to springboard off that and like their experiences in being part of journalism and the struggle.
I'll go first, I guess. I sort of make a thing about being like a professional gay, because when I was at uni, I studied journalism, and that's always what I wanted to do since I was really, really young. But I never really considered what kind of journalist I wanted to be until I was at uni. And one of our lecturers said, you should find like a niche, find something that you can be an expert on. And so some people in my class, that was fashion or sport or business or something like that. And I thought about this and thought, I can't think of anything I'm an expert on. I can't think of anything that I'm any good at. And then I was like, I'm quite good at being gay. It's quite a big part of my life. So I've never worked in mainstream media. I've always worked for LGBT press. My first job was as Scotland correspondent for the Pink paper, which sadly isn't around anymore. I've written for blogs like Lesbilicious. I've written freelance for some sort of mainstream publications, but that I always wanted to be in LGBT media, which is not an easy ambition to have because there are not very many publications. Diva magazine, for those who don't know, is the only monthly magazine for lesbians, bi, queer, non-binary folks in the UK and Europe, and it's one of only I think 3 in the world now. It's sort of monthly, or maybe even 2 in the world, monthly magazines now. So it's not, it's definitely not an easy path that I took, but didn't do it for the money or the glory. Did it because it was what I was passionate about. So I guess I can't really talk about the differences between what it's like working in mainstream, I suppose, to LGBT media. But even, I think, as maybe we'll touch on, I think there are even issues within that in terms of representation and so on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't know if anyone else kind of has a similar experience, but especially working for an LGBT publisher, there's a lot of kind of like responsibility to ensure that you know, we're using the correct terminology, we're being inclusive of all, like across the board, intersectional.
Well, we set the standard.
Yeah, exactly. I was wondering if, because you were talking to me on email a little bit before, we did talk beforehand, a bit about kind of like how you think it's really important that kind of like proper representation in journalism has a wider impact on kind of like the areas you're interested in. I wondered if you wanted to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Well, I just want to be very clear. I did not go to journalism school. I have a degree in musical theater, but I ended up in this world because I wrote funny songs about Pretty Little Liars on YouTube. Totally honest. And that's how I got my start, because I had a voice, and that voice is recognized. And so I've been able to, over the years, build that. But I think that it's so important that LGBTQ people write about LGBT issues. And in the United States, we have an organization called the National Gay and Lesbian Journalists Association, and it's important that we all have a connection with each other, because, like I said, we're the ones that are taking the first steps forward in the conversation, in diversity and inclusion and intersectionality. And I mean, I work particularly in entertainment, but entertainment has changed the world so much. And so I think that it's super important. It's why I'm doing a workshop on it. It's really important that all of you that have a passion for it have an opportunity to, you know, be in this world as well.
Cool. And Anais, obviously, on the panel, you're the only one who works for like the mainstream guys. How have you kind of like felt that your identity has kind of impacted your position?
Well, at first it's really hard because being a woman and LGBT in this kind of industry, it's really hard because you're not taken seriously all the time. My newspaper is run by 5 men, straight men. They choose. It's always their decision, so it's really hard. But I guess it's really important to be there anyway, because you can, like, sometimes you can say, this is not right, or you can choose, like, for example, we do a lot of, like, a family. At my work, it's always a man, a woman, and a children, like, every time. So when I knew I was going to do this panel, I was like, I'm going to try to change that. And on the right, you can see there is a couple with 1 child, and it's 2 women. Like, and I had to do it like hidden, like I didn't tell anybody I did it, and I was like, if nobody noticed, it's gonna be in the journal for the first time. 2 women. So yeah.
As kind of like women in general, and I kind of use women here spelt with an X, so that's inclusive of non-binary and trans folks and stuff like that. So being a kind of woman, I think it's very important to be at the table and also be, I guess, like representing what you mean as a person, if that makes sense. So like, that's really amazing that you just kind of like, just sneakily almost, like just being in the room has made like a difference that's going to be like have a huge impact for someone who's just kind of like flicking through, and it normalizes stuff in like a wider context.
Well, as they say in Hamilton, be in the room where it happens, and you were in the room where it happens, and you made something important.
Yeah,
so
really
that's why you can like, it's amazing to do only LGBT stuff. I would love to only write, but it's also important to be where it's about everything else, because you can really, even if it's a small thing, like there is this bad candidate, you will choose a bad photo. There is like, you can do stuff even if it's not in LGBT media. It's important.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, because often we can feel like we're just talking, in this sort of echo chamber.
Right.
We're talking about, everyone just knows this, so that's challenging. And I think actually we do need to, as well as have our own spaces and tell our own stories, we also need to be in that room and to be doing what you're doing. And something very small can actually be quite revolutionary, I think.
I was wondering what you guys sort of, so like considering the political landscape, both kind of like even in the UK and Europe and the US, obviously, there's obviously quite a lot of, like, I guess, hateful rhetoric, or kind of like, even, so in the UK, for those of you who don't know, there's a consultation on the Gender Recognition Act, which means that trans people's bodies and identities have been openly discussed by kind of like cis women, and also, unfortunately, sometimes some lesbian women have kind of voiced their, I guess, discomfort with the trans community. And I just wondered how, especially for Diva, how important it is for you guys to kind of like have a stance there.
Yeah. Do you want to take this?
Yeah, I mean, we did. Well, you wrote a letter as well. That's how it kind of begun after London Pride, and after there were some protests by people who were kind of joining in on these conversations on Twitter and weren't inclusive of trans women. So Carrie wrote a letter, and that was kind of emphasising the hashtag #LWithThe movement, and just kind of making it really clear to our readers that we are behind that. And I think that's what we've been doing, really. It's just making sure that our readers know that we are working as #LWithThe, and making sure we have those voices in there from everyone, from trans women and non-binary women as well. So yeah, I think it's just important that we do make our stance clear. And we did feature on BBC Newsnight a few weeks ago as well. And again, it just kind of taking that opportunity. It came up very last minute. I was the only one available, so I went on. But it was just like, we have to take this opportunity to just kind of be there, be present, and kind of say, look, we are Diva magazine. We're one of the few magazines that exist out there, and we are, #LWithThe, we're standing with trans and non-binary women,
And I think we've always made a point of doing that at Diva. Like, if anyone is a reader, we've always had regular columnists who are trans people and non-binary people. Yeah. We've had trans people on our covers, and our recent game-changing issue celebrating Black History Month. One of those people was a trans woman. And so we've always tried to just make that, I think, quite intrinsic. Like, when I joined Diva, that was something I really noticed, was how important that is kind of to the brand and to what we make. But then I think with all of this horrible stuff that's been going on, it's felt necessary to really reaffirm that.
And that, I mean, it felt quite depressing that we had to say that. But I think it got to a point that the noise online was so much and so vitriolic that it was important for us to say there is no space for this in our magazine, and that actually that's a very vocal minority, but it isn't, I think, what the majority of the community feel. And as a cis lesbian, it's important for me to say that that's not, you don't represent all cis lesbians. And the response we've had has been incredibly moving. We've had so many letters from trans people and non-binary people, but also cis people saying thank you for doing this. And so that's felt really, it's felt really good to get that sort of feedback.
We're dealing with that in the United States as well. We have all these bathroom bills, and I agree. I think it's really important that people who are in media take a stand. Like, I mean, I have a zero tolerance policy for exclusion, and so I think from somebody in the entertainment industry, because we're dealing with this current backlash in the United States against LGBT, against minorities, against trans people, I think it's even more important that we go out there and we cover and we support LGBTQ characters and people in the media, because the media, entertainment, television, film, it has a way of working its way into people's hearts and minds in a way that pretty much nothing else does. So I'm happy to be on the front lines in that respect, not necessarily on the front lines of that you might be in mainstream media, but what we're all doing is important in its own way.
I was actually, because I'm really interested in the kind of like, because I guess entertainment is the way that you kind of reach people without them almost realizing. So it's like suddenly there's more representation on your Netflix or whatever. And I was just wondering whether you think that how far we've come. I don't know, in like the last 5 years, like I'm no expert, but it feels to me that we've had like there's been a marked change.
My God. in the last 10 years, like like, it is such a huge amount. But yes, in the last 5 years, the face of entertainment has changed tremendously. And I credit social media with that a lot, because people have direct contact with creators and showrunners and actors. It has been mind-blowing being on the inside, and it's also been super satisfying. It's not perfect. It's definitely not perfect, but I mean, pretty much any night of the week you can turn on a television show and find a queer or trans character or non-binary character, and that's a really big deal. So yeah, it's been super important. And if you look at the correlation of the American people and how they feel about LGBTQ people, the rise in entertainment and visibility and the rise in acceptance, they go hand in hand.
Yeah, I think that I'm probably going to completely quote this stat wrong, so don't hold me to this. But I think it's something like, from some YouGov data, the 49%, so that's my colleague there, 49% of people identify as not 100% straight. And I have heard a statistic from somewhere, but I do not know where this came from, but it sounds very impressive, that 70%, don't quote me on this, of Gen Z would consider themselves like somewhere on the spectrum rather than being one way or another. So I'm just thinking, do you think that maybe kind of like growing up with a more...
Oh yeah, and I'm sure the Diva folks can talk to this too. I mean, absolutely, these kids have grown up in a world where gay and queer and trans characters were on their screens already. Yeah. They never had to fight for acceptance. And I'm not saying that there's not enough, but I mean, their straight allies grew up with it too, and their straight allies support them in ways that I couldn't have even dreamed of my straight allies supporting me back then. Yeah.
My younger sister has just turned 19, and I think she'd still identify as straight, as cis and straight, but she is so aware of everything that's going on, and even queer culture and characters, and she'll send me a message saying, oh, you need to check out this new series on Netflix. It's got like a really awesome kind of like diverse cast. There's a really cool like queer character on there, and I'm just like, how, like, she's, she has no huge reason to be like following that, but she's just like, yeah, and she loves it, and it's just completely usual.
It's second nature.
Exactly. It's not even like, oh, there's a special thing. She only tells me because I work at Diva, so she's like, oh, you should check this out. But yeah, it's just completely usual for that to be on her like radar as well, which is great.
Keeping this kind of stuff in mind, what was your sort of, if people are happy to talk about it, your kind of like experience with maybe like coming to term, because obviously we're all kind of just programmed to be straight essentially, or like fit into a specific kind of, whatever. But I guess what was it like when you were kind of coming to terms of, hey, I'm actually not this, and like, sorry, I'm just blabbing now, but tell me about your coming out stories.
I went to an all-girls high school. So it was really easy. No, I mean, it really, honestly, it was.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in outside of Detroit, Michigan.
Okay, so not like the Bible Belt.
No, but I grew up a while ago, so you'll never get my age out of me. But I grew up not seeing anything. I mean, if I saw anything, it was a movie, maybe from the UK or something, or that was it. Nothing on television, and it took years. It wasn't until I was, like an adult, really, that I saw anything really that represented me. So I felt alone in a lot of ways that I think that I'm really glad millennials and Gen Z don't have to feel. What about you?
What?
Anyone.
You guys go.
Okay, guys, let's do my coming out story.
I didn't mean to just drop that.
Well, it's good. Well, it's funny talking about how important the things you see on your screen are, because when I think about me being, a closeted lesbian teenager, I just think of like binge watching The L Word on repeat, and then rewind to that scene with Shane and Carmen, and then let's do that bit again. So I think just The L Word, Tipping the Velvet. If you haven't seen that, girls and guys and everybody and all people, please see it. It's so good. and Sugar Rush and Bad Girls. It's like I wasn't out to anybody except the characters in the TV shows. Like when I was watching that by myself, hidden away from my parents, holed up in my room, that was my safe little space that those programmes created. But they, you know, it took me a long time to come to terms with what the obvious thread was throughout my favourite programmes. So yeah, it blows my mind to think now that people literally have gotten so much choice.
Yeah.
So much choice. It's absolutely wild. I can't quite imagine it. And on Corrie and on just cropping up on, you know, on the soaps and things. It's crazy.
I think that's
No,
go
please,
ahead.
go
I was
ahead.
just adding to the choice, the variety.
Yeah.
I think it is great as well, just because we have so many, non-binary, trans, and bisexual characters as well.
Yeah.
Because I think when I was younger, maybe I just was like, hey, I like women. Oh, I must be gay. But there wasn't really that much representation of bi characters, so you really, you kind of felt like, oh, I have to choose one or the other, you know. So I think it took me a little bit longer to really, like, kind of come out and be like, oh no, I'm bisexual. But now there's a lot more than there was. Yeah, so that's great.
My coming out story, I fell in love with my best friend when I was like 14, as you do.
Classic.
And
That old chestnut.
like, I wanted it to be like super dramatic, right? But it wasn't. Like, my family were like, okay, cool, and you know, it was fairly easy for me. But it was difficult because I guess those representations that I saw in the news was always about like lesbian murderers.
Right.
Negative. On TV, it was dead lesbians. Like, so I think it, like, there was some sort of like insidious like drip that my life was going to be really miserable, and so I could be gay, but I wasn't going to be happy or successful or, you know, achieve any dreams or goals or anything like that. And that wasn't really helped by the fact that I didn't really know anyone in my life either. I couldn't look to like an older lesbian and think, well, she's got it sorted. There wasn't nothing like that. So while the initial coming out was okay, I think the sort of news landscape around me, I mean, this was sort of early noughties, was really, really negative. And I think you still see it now. I mean, so often news stories about queer people, it's a negative. The fact that, like, you know, lesbian such and such and such, you know, shoplifted. Like, why is it relevant that she's a lesbian? It's not at all. So you want more visibility, but you don't want that sort of visibility, you know? So, it's really important for me then as a journalist to not just tell the negative, but, you know, also celebrate our identity, celebrate the good things, and show, I guess, those younger people that there is a happy ending, that you can be happy and successful, and, you know, it doesn't mean that you have to have some sort of second-rate life because you're queer, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually interesting what you just said there, because I feel like a lot of kind of LGBT plus media is a bit of a like horror story, really. The narrative is very much, you know, murder and just horror. And I just wonder kind of like how you guys kind of tackle the light and the dark, if you know what I mean. So how do you keep the like positive message shining through? And like, so at Pink News we have sometimes we'll be like, why are we covering this? Because you obviously have to cover some of the kind of like oppression in, you know, in parts of the world where it's still very much frowned upon or illegal to be yourself, essentially. So there are some things that we do want to cover, but a lot of the time we sit there and we're like, why are we covering this? Are we just covering this because the person happens to be lesbian or happens to be gay or happens to be trans? So how do you guys kind of like battle that?
I just don't. I just don't cover negative stuff anymore. I did when I was at my previous website, but I really made a conscious effort that I wanted the blog at Bella Books to be a very positive space for people to come, for people to see representations of themselves in a really positive way. And I do discuss important political and cultural things on Twitter, but I really needed to create a safe space for people. And that was really important to me.
I think it's very different for Diva because we're a lifestyle magazine.
Yeah.
So that affords us the gift that we're able to lighten things up with, you know, a funny story or an opinion piece or a fabulous feature about what the stars of Carmilla have been saying behind the scenes or whatever it is. But I think it's something we're definitely conscious of, like in all of our editorial meetings, like we do want to obviously be tackling the important issues, but we also want to keep the light and shade, and we really want to keep the light.
And I think often that can be as simple as the way, the tone in which you write. Roxy's like one of the, I mean, if you haven't read Diva, you should, just for her pieces. She's got an incredible way of talking about horrible things in a really sort of funny, gentle way. So you can talk about things like, my family are really homophobic and I can't really be myself and I can't take my girlfriend home, but in a way that makes you laugh as well, you know. So yeah, I think for us it's finding a balance in terms of what we commission and what we cover, but also the way that we talk about things as well, making sure that it's handled with care.
Anais, I was just interested, going back a little bit to how you managed to kind of like sneak your queer agenda in. Is there kind of like, have you ever experienced a time where maybe, I know that kind of this used to happen maybe to me a little bit in a previous life, is that you kind of had to pull someone up or maybe question something in like the way a news story is running or anything like that? Has there been an instance where you've been like, you're using the wrong terminology or this isn't the way something should be covered? Or is there the opportunity to even do that? We still have a long way to come.
Like, do you mean if I...
So, for example, if, say you're kind of asked to, I don't know, like, make some graphics for a story. Obviously, we've given an example previously.
Yeah, okay.
But is there, like, an opportunity for you to kind of have a voice and say, no, we're doing this wrong, or we should do it like this?
It's like a constant fight, like, because when I have to represent, like, a couple, like I said, I already tried to, like, do 2 guys or 2 girls, and my boss is like, you know, most of our readers are straight, it could be wrong, and I'm like, so you try constantly, sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it works, so you just have to keep fighting, and do I insert or? Oh, yeah, no, perfect.
I haven't really got many other questions that I specifically wanted to talk about, although I am quite interested, just off the back of our discussion earlier, whether or not, because Carrie, you were saying that you obviously decided that you were very good at being gay, so it was kind of like an accelerator in your career choice. Yeah. But for anyone else, or even Carrie as well, has there been a time in journalism or when you were starting out or at university or when you decided to come into this sphere that your identity was either a barrier or an accelerator to what you were doing?
I guess because I decided that's where I was going to go, you know, that's what it did. But it made things very difficult. But because like I said, there weren't very many places that you could go and you could be that specialist. I think these days some mainstream places, certainly in the UK, are a little bit better. They'll have like an LGBT editor or something like that. But it certainly wasn't the case when I was starting out. And I was definitely nervous about writing about LGBT issues at uni, because even though like I think I look pretty gay, you know, there's always that like nervousness about like, do people really know and how they're going to react to this. So I was nervous about that. I think once I got my sort of foot in the door, that helped. But it's interesting actually, like even my dad, who's lovely, like he says things like, you know, you're worried that you've like pigeonholed yourself, like, you know, should you not like be a bit more general, like, oh, you never get a job anywhere else now. And so that's like a worry, I suppose, sometimes, like, because you think, well, you know, are LGBT publications going to be around forever? I guess as things get more accepted generally, or that mainstream places are better at covering these issues, maybe there's no need to have your own publications anymore. And then I think, well, this been my job. This is all I've done. I don't know.
Well, the good news is queer people aren't going anywhere.
Fingers crossed. But yeah, I guess it's in some ways it's been an accelerator because, you know, I made myself that expert. That was the advice that was given, and I tried to do that. And And now I'm in a very privileged position that I get to write about the things that I love and that I'm passionate about, and then I'm often called on to be a sort of expert by the mainstream as well to talk on issues. So, I just try and ignore my dad when he tells me that I have terrible career choices.
But that goes with any specialism. You could be like, I write about fishing.
True.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
I've never had any experience outside of the LGBTQ sphere. I started in it. I'm 7 years later. I'm still in it. If you want to pigeonhole me, that's fine. Like, go ahead. It's been nothing but great for my career.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
I think it's similar as well.
Yeah, for me it was hard because it's not about just getting in the media industry. It's about like if you're okay being gay and out about it, and so it was hard in the media industry because there is a lot of boys, there is a lot of straight girls, straight boys, and you're here, you're all small, and it's really hard to be taken seriously. So it was hard to get the job because I wasn't like a standard. But yeah, so for me it was more of a barrier than an accelerator.
Did you feel like you had to come out at work?
At first I didn't, even I guess it shows a bit. But we had like a party and my girlfriend came and I kissed her in front of everybody. I was drunk, so whatever. So that's how I did my coming out to my entire work. And I actually realized that they just didn't care.
Yeah.
Like nobody is talking to me about it, but I know they know, and nobody is bitching me around or whatever. So it's actually sometimes you're scared to do your coming out, and you can realize that people just don't care. Like. So it was cool.
I think that this goes for kind of like anyone, but like the biggest lesson I ever learned was that it's okay to be your true self at work. Like, because when I very first started working in journalism, I sort of was like acting in a certain way, almost like I had to be like very professional and very serious. And then I sort of was like, oh, fuck it, I'm going to like swear in front of my editor and just be like a bit gross because I am and wear trainers. But like, on kind of every level, work becomes so much easier, no matter, even if you are working for like the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, that it is okay to just be yourself.
It also makes your writing better.
Yeah.
When you're able to be your authentic self comes through in all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
I think as well, I'd add to that the kind of journalism that I'm passionate about is feature writing and opinion piece writing. And in those fields, like, there is an inexhaustible hunger for voices. And if you are queer or you do have a marginalised identity, I think it's something in your mindset, like, see that as a selling point. You've got a different perspective. They've got 100 pitches from a straight white cis man with his straight white cis approach. You can offer them something different. And if you're an editor, you want something different. You're looking for a different take on things. I think when I started in journalism, I probably saw my sexuality as a barrier, and I probably saw it as something, because I wanted to write those kind of women's writing, women's, Cosmo or whatever, those kind of magazines. But I think as I realised actually, your voice as a writer, that is your talent, that is your craft, that is your everything. So just try and see it positively and think, hey, actually, I've got a whole different take on this, and this is something which I have to offer because of this, rather than seeing it as a barrier.
Cool.
I mean, well done.
If it's okay, I was going to put questions to the floor if anyone has any. This is when no one puts their hand up. But we have like 15 minutes or maybe a little bit less to just like have a chat, basically.
Yeah, so basically you kind of touched on the subject about maybe how to report on tragic stuff happening. And as I mentioned, I'm from Brazil, and Brazil is going through very tragic times now. And it's stuff that I want to talk about, and I talk about naturally because also like I'm living here for a master's, so people say like, oh, where are you from? Brazil. Oh, what's happening there? So yeah, I want to bring it out what I've been thinking of, because there's no point of just saying like there is a lot of hate crimes as the same way that happened when Trump got elected. There is a spike in hate crimes because of this homophobe got elected. And I want to do that, but also I was thinking at the end of everything, to action
Mm-hmm.
and how to help. And I was asking, I just wonder, like, what would you guys do? Like, how would you guys report? Any ideas or how? Yeah.
I would try to give voices to other people in that situation. I think it's really important for LGBTQ journalists to raise up other voices, and you might have a perfect opportunity to do that. Everyone's going to have a very unique perspective. Everyone's going through a really hard time right now, but getting those voices out into the world helps the rest of us hear those stories too.
In a kind of very sort of, this is where I think you can just take lessons from mainstream. So when we tackle really difficult subjects in journalism, like for example suicide, at the end of, you'll see this on television when there's been a particularly troubling scene, or there's an article about like suicide statistics. At the bottom there'll be information for where people can go to either get help themselves or do something off the back of it. Something that we're quite passionate about at Pink News moving, I guess, in the next kind of, what we're working towards in the next year or so, is to kind of try and drive change. So say you read about, God, now I have to think of an example. Say you read about a situation in Brazil and you're like, this is horrible, I want to know how I can help. We then would drive you to like, hey, you can sign this petition, or you can join this thing, or you can donate to this charity, or like, here's groups in your local area who meet and talk about this thing. So it's kind of turning tragedy into like maybe like a positive action afterwards, I think is like, you know how at the bottom of articles will just be like, you can call Samaritans on this number. So it's just driving people to the right places after they've been impacted by what you've written or reported on.
Yeah, I think I'd add to that as well. I think we're lucky with Diva is that we don't have to be objective, like I'm sure, you know, a lot of mainstream publications have to be, or pretend.
Yeah, we're super biased.
Like, we absolutely have a stance, and we are not shy about telling you what that is. So, you know, if we're writing about the situation in Brazil, for example, then we'll always have a call to action. We'll always have something that you can do. If you feel angry about this or upset about this or you want to help, this is what you can do. And I think, like Dana was saying, it's really important as well that it's the people who are affected by that tell that story, that have that experience. I don't want to be like, hey, because I've never been to Brazil, I don't know what the situation is. So as a commissioner, when I'm commissioning a piece, I want to hear that voice. I want it to be authentic. I want there to be something that we can do. And yeah, absolutely. I think Diva, as well as being a magazine, we're a campaigning organisation in lots of ways, you know. So when it comes to like the GRA stuff, or you know, consultation or something like that, we're very much, this is what our stance is. Here's how you know, we've done various sort of thunderclap campaigns and other things over the years, and we're not apologetic about that, you know. And I think that's a freedom that's not afforded to some other publications. So I feel very blessed in that regard.
I.e., please pitch to us.
There you go. And don't forget to connect with other journalists around the world. I mean, the network we have all built together is a big sounding board, and it has a big reach. So, you know, when you've written something, tag us, like talk to us on Twitter. We'll help get your story out the best we can too.
Yeah.
It's also about finding kind of like, wherever there is trauma, there are people who are making the best of it as well. So we recently had a woman who lives in Russia. She's a queer woman. She pitched some video stories to us because she's part of this queer tango dance society, and it's almost this little underground movement where people just get together, like all ages, and like have a dance, but they all happen to be queer. But just like, we were able to report on that being like, this is a really nice thing, and then but the kind of like outer meaning there was like in a place where it's not okay to be queer, if you know what I mean. Anything else from anyone else? Don't be shy.
How do you balance, and from like that, what my actual question is, well, as like specialised LGBTQ plus, like how do you balance like your relationship with mainstream media? Because I imagine like that is needed, that you know, whether it's entertainment or whether it's lifestyle, like keeping the ethics or more of what you want, and balancing the need to have those relationships, and sometimes it must not work.
Right. I spend a lot of time yelling at the mainstream media. No, seriously though, I feel it's really important for people in LGBT media to call not a call out, I hate the call out culture, like word or whatever, but it's important for us to say, hey, this thing you're covering and the way you're covering it, not so great. Maybe you need to like look at this from a different perspective. And I think that we need mainstream media and queer shows need mainstream media, but we also need to have a reciprocal relationship where they're covering things in an important and appropriate manner.
Yeah, absolutely. I write a piece in the magazine every month called Media Watch, where I basically just have a go at the mainstream media and stuff that they've done wrong. And so, like, that's part of my brand. I love criticising the mainstream media. But I'm also not, like, shy. Like, I want to help media generally to be better on reporting about LGBTQ issues. So, you know, if Newsnight do get in touch, or The Guardian want to write a piece and they want to ask for a lesbian perspective or something, often they will get in touch with us. And so we want to help them out, and we'll try our best to do that, but in a way that, as long as we feel like we're not being like, we're not just like a toy that they pick up and put down. So we'll help you out with this story, sure, but it has to be for the right reasons, and it has to be the right story. And you know, often we also get like TV shows who'll, like producers who'll come and be like, we want a bi woman for this thing, and we're like, that looks really gross. No, like we're not doing it. But if it is like, we genuinely want to reach out and make our show better, can you help us to do that? Sure, yeah, we wanna help you. So
I don't know if you guys would agree with this, but I do think that any kind of minority media or specialist media has a greater responsibility, not that this is particularly correct, than the mainstream to get it right.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, it does feel like often we've got this huge weight on our shoulders. And I think for Diva, particularly because we are the only magazine that is around, so you're trying to speak to everyone, and all they have in common is maybe that they like women, you know, not even that sometimes. So trying to balance, like, what are we interested in, and like, how old are you, and where are you from, and fitting all of those things into 100 pages is really tough, and doing it in a way that feels fair and that feels like we're doing justice to people's stories is really hard. But it's like definitely a challenge, I think, that we're all up for, and that we all want to do. And we're just so passionate about it, you know. I think that's what makes us different, I think, from lots of other sort of mainstream publications. Like, we do it because we love it, because it's our lives, we're telling our stories, you know. But I think, there's definitely room for improvement. I mean, in terms of representation within LGBT media, it's still very, very white, still very middle class. Like, I'm from like a working class background. Like, I didn't go to private school or anything like that, so I found that was harder for me than my sexuality, like trying to get a job in the media, trying to get my foot in the door. So yeah, I've completely lost my train of thought. Basically, it's great to be gay.
Well, something I think is really important to drive home is that most queer media is independent. And if you're not buying a subscription to Diva's gonna suffer eventually. If you're not supporting queer media, if you're not putting your money where your mouth is, you're not gonna have queer media, independent queer media anymore. And I'm not trying to scare you or anything, but I've watched site after site after site fold in the last few years because we need support. So if you are appreciating the resources that you're getting from Pink News and from Diva and from Autostraddle and things like that, then if you can, try to support them in some way. If it's not financially getting the word out for them, it's super important.
I think we have time for... Oh, are we clapping? I think we have time for one more, if there is one. Come on.
So you guys, I'm not a journalist, I'm a writer. I like to try and do something in mainstream, and I'm really wanting to try and do something in terms of female strength and obviously queer representation. Amy, you touched on it, that we have a fantastic amount of representation at the moment, but in mainstream they will quite often say we have too much and there's obviously
There's never enough!
there are the haters that will say there is too much and that we shouldn't have this much on, have this much on our screens.
Right.
How do you guys, as, I don't know if it's just an outsider's perspective, but I feel like you guys are more forward progressive in that you guys do have those outlets, obviously property, propane. How do you guys feel that we as people who are trying to write should deal with that sort of rejection? Do we just band together with everybody, and sort of like what advice then would you give Anais as to what should she do being in a place where you can't really have that representation?
Well, I mean, there are statistics out there. I mean, some people you can only get to them with knowledge, with facts, you know. We're still a pretty small part of entertainment, you know. So there's always backlash when there is progression. And so what you're seeing, what you're getting is the backlash from people being like, oh gosh, there's like a gay couple on a show people like, it's gay everywhere, they're shoving it down my throat. Sorry, that's just like sorry, my New York came out there for a second. But have things to back yourself up if you need to. This world needs more queer characters and queer representation and queer coverage. That if that person, if like one outlet's like tells you that, move on to a different outlet, because there's plenty of coverage that needs to happen, and other places will. Especially like, I mean, come to someone like me or someone like Diva, you know.
Is it Reuters that has recently opened an LGBT arm? So it is infiltrating. There is space.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I often bang on about is that yes, we're getting more representation, but it's in lots of ways still very tokenistic. You know, so I think it's important if you're pitching something, for example, as a writer, that you're saying that this is a story that isn't being told. You know, like, yeah, I might see a lesbian on TV, but I'm not seeing like a disabled lesbian on TV, or I'm not seeing like a lesbian of color on TV. I'm not seeing like anyone who looks like me on TV, or I'm reading a story, but like this doesn't speak to me. It doesn't speak to my identity, because we're so. Even on this panel, like we all have different experiences and different backgrounds and different sexualities, you know, different gender expressions, all of these things. So it's kind of offensive if like a newspaper or a magazine or a TV show is like, well, we did a lesbian thing. Like, no, you didn't. Like, and I hear so many stories about, I mean, there's a TV producer I know who pitched a show around about the same time as the L Word, and she was told, you've got your show, you've had it, you know? And so we might get a show like that every 5 years or every 10 years, you know? And so I think it's about being, demanding better, asking for better, just like banging people's doors down until they like say yes to you, you know? So like, if you're pitching something as a writer, just keep harassing them, pick up the phone, like until they're like, fine, okay, we'll run your piece. Like, just, you know, be persistent. And I think if we band together and if we, you know, back each other up, and like solidarity for me is really important. Like I don't ever want to like shut down, like, you know, I don't see anyone as competition. Do you know what I mean? I think we all have a duty to support each other as like queer media creators and things like that. And hopefully then if we can do that, it makes things a little bit easier for people like you who are, you know, really on the front lines and who, you know, it can be difficult to be even just out of work. Like that's, you know, that shouldn't be the case. I really take it for granted that I can rock up to work and like completely like, this is my life, and work with people who get it and get me, you know. I feel incredibly lucky for that.
With that, we are exactly on time.
Very good.
So I feel like this is probably a good place to end, but I want to say a massive thank you for you all for coming, and for my panelists.
I'm doing a workshop tomorrow. So if you are interested in becoming an LGBTQ journalist or a writer, I'm doing a workshop tomorrow about pitching and planning and passion. So it's going to be super fun and really interactive. If that's something you're interested in, I'd love to see you there.
Cool.
Thanks, guys.